formation, in which we saw most of these principals gathered right there, right next to Gideon Moi. Are we looking at NASA reincarnated as we get closer to 2022? Because it seems that is the script.
Yes, we are. I think eventually we don't underestimate the power of the office of the president. That office is extremely powerful. And I think the One Kenya Alliance will eventually back Raila Odinga in this contest.
Eventually, what do you mean by eventually? Before the 2022 general election, or in terms of forcing a runoff so they fall to one side?
Before the 2020 general election, because they will work under the illusion that they can actually win the election. So they will have to be together before the election. What they are doing now is called positioning. They are merely positioning. They know eventually their candidate is Raila Odinga, because the president wanted to be like that.
Okay. This is interesting. Guled, add your voice to this, because if I hear the members of parliament from Ukambani, they say Kalonzo Musyoka all the way. And this time around, we're not stepping down for one Raila Odinga. Even Kalonzo mentioned it would be a fool to do the same without any inch of reciprocity. Musalia Mudavidi's allies have been talking the same. Is it just raising their stakes? And as you answer that, will the center hold at the end of the day?
Put this into context, Jesse. Musalia Kalonzo Musyoka at most has about 1.5 million votes, what he can bring into the basket. Musalia Mudavadi, probably around 1 to 2 million votes, not more. The others also almost the same. The only two people probably who can carry some weight are William Ruto and Raila Odinga.
Okay.
So, you know, this country was a country that was being driven previously through coalitions. You remember the NASA coalition, then we had the CORD coalition before then. So this group of now, the what is it called, Oka Kenya, the One Kenya Alliance, is just a conglomeration of previous allies under either NASA or CORD. The only addition here is maybe Gideon Moi. So I don't see, honestly, their candidature being viable on their own. They will have made sense only if they are grouped. You know, the BBI will have sorted out this issue easily for them because there are positions to be shared.
True.
Now with the BBI failure, there are no positions to be shared. So I don't even know how these alliances will look like. But one thing I know for sure is that on their own, they may not really survive beyond the couple of months coming. And if they go to the general election, your argument that the objective is to cause a rerun so that there is no one absolute winner in the election that will happen. But that's also a risk they will take, because how do you know? When you look at now how the situation is on the ground, and when we listen to what people say, it looks like William Ruto already is gathering beyond 50% of the votes as we speak even now. The only way maybe they will have managed to mitigate that is if they came together and work as a united force. That probably will have diminished his role, his position from what it is now.
But will the center hold? At the end of the day, they broke off NASA due to lack of trust, and they were quite loud about it.
Yeah.
So
the trust issue is there. I remember the NASA coalition leaders were very bitter when Raila Odinga went to shake hands with the president alone, without them. And probably the biggest challenge that came to NASA is also the sharing of the political parties' funding, which became protracted. So I think the mistrust is also very, very, very high. But at the same time, the reality will dawn that even though you mistrust, what other options do you have? And that is where the challenge is. And I think they will be forced in the end, as Professor said, to all flock in the same direction. I honestly right now don't understand the logic of all this, you know, forming all these small parties, each one running for president. I saw the other day, Mwangi wa Iria of Muranga was also planning to run for president. Speaker of the National Assembly is running for president. We are seeing all these parties cropping up, mushrooming of parties. It looks like there is people are trying to, you know, strengthen their own local base politically. But at the national level, they all mean nothing. And I think that's where William Ruto is really gaining also momentum, because he keeps on, portraying them as tribal. You saw him in the clip there, in the soundbite, where he says, party where all the officials speak the same language, the meetings, the parliamentary group are done in the same language. So simply saying, if you are going in that direction, then you will have only parties that are so tribal, they will have no national outlook.
All right. And I beg, even as you heard your voice, Professor, is the DP party tribal party as it is right now? And do you believe there's a three-horse race scenario? Because I imagine the re-emergence of these small parties is due to a gap, and they're trying to fit it, especially in the Mount Kenya region.
There will not be a three-horse race. I believe eventually wouldn't be two-horse race. Three-horse race will only happen should the Mount Kenya decide to back Muturi, because this is the only candidate who has declared to run the Mount Kenya region. But again, let me just say that Ngulende is not right on one thing. Then believe that these people can bring their tribe vote is actually erroneous. And I think they are working on that and believe themselves. You have to remember when Mundavadi got, he could only get 412,000 votes. So he doesn't have the 2 million votes from the lawyers. If he didn't get it then, there's no guarantee that he isn't getting them. Now, when people become so enlightened, when the social media says what is innate for me, so it's not possible. Now, the only person I believe may very well, according to Ngulende, control the vote, the Kalonzo may in a big way control the Gamba. And that is, again, is just me. So what is happening here also is there's, again, the confusion. There's also no guarantee that Ruto can actually carry the population as it is right now, because this is what people need to understand what is happening. The Ruto support largely in the Mount Kenya region is based on the economic mismanagement of the Jubilee. People are angry. People need to punish the president. So if you want to punish the president, what do? You support the person he hates. When we are in the ground in Mero the other day, we are just told, if you are not on the side of Ruto, please don't just come here again. So what is happening here is that as long as the economy continues to underperform, you may very well find the Ruto in the presidency. If the economy were a miracle were to happen and it improves, he will also face scrutiny. But right now, nobody is the only one offering hope. So this is how you need to look at the situation.
Yeah. And I think the economy will be the trump card. And you have to give it to Ruto in one or the other. He's been able to break off that particular narrative that he was part of the Jubilee administration in this 2017 to 2022 term. But gentlemen, I'd like us to shift focus to matters in the country. When it comes to the general election, Simba Gulaid, I'm looking at former IEBC bosses who are the center of the 2022 poll. Mr. Ezra Chiloba, just recently the Director General at the Communications Authority, and Derito, who's the party's registrar, previously led the electoral training at IEBC. Makilet Kasait, the Data Commissioner, headed voter education, and Mr. James Muhati on the front page of the Daily Nation is the Huduma Kenya chief and was in charge of ICT at the IEBC. And there's one Ndongo Wanaina who's been quoted right here saying, the question we need to ask ourselves is, who are these people? Where are they coming from? The fact that we have an entire infrastructure that is central to the election being run by people who are part of IEBC, which was indicted by the Supreme Court in 2017, raises fundamental questions on their role. So do you read these appointments with any hint of suspension?
And I think it may appear so that, that there's an ulterior motive behind appointing people who many Kenyans believe may have mismanaged the election previously. But personally, I'm not really worried, because I think we have come very far. In Kenya today, stealing elections is like it's becoming a thing of the past. It is no longer tenable. It is becoming very, very difficult. Remember, when we just had by-elections last few months, we had, from what we hear, people who have been participating in that election, there were attempts maybe to change the trajectory of the elections, but it didn't really succeed. So that is only symptomatic of what's likely to happen also in the general election. Because, you know, our transmission of results approach has really changed. What we now have is that the results are declared at the polling station. And as long as you have very strong agents on the ground who are able to freely take pictures and capture the results immediately on real-time basis, it's very, very difficult for any government, however strong it is, to manipulate or tamper with the elections. And probably my fear is any attempt to excessively use force or to do that will simply lead us into chaos that we may not be able to resolve.
All right. Professor, add your voice to this, because the key of the matter when it came to the 2017 Supreme Court petition was the transmission of the results, which falls under the docket of the Communications Authority, which is being led by one individual. So connect the dots, Prof.
For me, I think I see a very clever ploy actually to attempt at a clever rigging, because when you control the Communication Authority and you control IEBC, you can set up illegal polling stations. This is why some of us were suggesting that the presidential tallying center be the county headquarters. You finish there and they send only one who resorted to Nairobi, to the National Tallying Center from the counties. That is, the county receives result from polling stations, collating the county, then the county sends only one. That means Nairobi receives 47 entries only. So if there is a problem in the certain county, you can block that county and recount. But when they will be streaming from for over 50,000 polling stations, and you control the Communication Authority and control IEBC, you can set up illegal polling stations and wait for the court to decide, wait for the fellows to go to court. So I think people shouldn't be worried by the positioning which is taking place. It's not innocent. I mean, it cannot be innocent. First of all, these people proved that they are not competent to run the election. That's why the court overruled them.
Okay. Or
rather, not even incompetent. They proved that they were not honest. They didn't put their country first. That's how they failed in the first place. But reassembling them in an election like this, which is very interesting, which the powers that be has expressed dislike of one of the candidates, if it's not in quote, the dislike, then it's tricky. I think people need to be very careful. My advice is people need to allow people to elect their leaders and deal with their situation and suffer the consequences, because an attempt to manipulate, election can only be manipulated, and Ngolende is right, if it is close.
Okay.
If it's a massive 3 million in distance, there's nothing you can do. And if you try to do something at that time, you create trouble for all of us. So the best thing is to avoid that. But you see, when you get naive people, you can easily put the country into trouble. Okay. And that's risky.
Okay, as you heard your voice, Gulade, the developments over the past few weeks, we got to know that the deep state is there, and it's quite deep, by the way. So, as Professor is mentioning, in case of a close election, might this perhaps be the trump card, as from where you sit, in terms of making that difference? And perhaps, Kenyans are a suspicious lot. They will read too much into everything. So are we reading too much into this, as you also give your analysis?
First of all, I want to demystify the concept of deep state. I think they are not as deep and they are not as big as people think. So far, if we go by the events of the last few months, clearly the deep state has not been as deep as it appears. Look at the elections in Msambweni. Look at the elections in Juja, Kiambaa, and many other places where the government lost, basically, to what appears to be the new opposition. So that is one. Secondly, reflect back in history, 2002. When the government then fronted Uhuru Kenyatta to be the favorite candidate, he lost miserably. And the deep state at that time was also there. So the deep state may not be as, as powerful as it appears. So I think going forward, as we go to 2022, we are having, just say, if you may allow me to say this, that there's a total new block of voters that have come on board. 7 million young people who are born and now are registered voters who are born after 1995, what you refer to as the millennials. These are young people who really don't understand, the history. They don't know what happened during the second liberation. And you cannot, convince them to keep the establishment in place because of what has happened in the past. What they look at is the present. What do we have on the table? Do we have food on the table? Do we have jobs? Okay. That's how they interpret things. So I think this is a very dangerous group also if you play around with them. So by merely putting a few individuals, as you may guess, in strategic positions, it may not really, in the overall, development towards the transition, may not really have an impact. And if things are forced beyond the necessary, I am afraid it could lead to, we have seen chaos erupting in African countries. Remember the Arab Spring? There was just a small trigger. And what has nowadays come up again is what we have not seen before. African countries are going back to the times of military coups. We saw what happened in Guinea. We saw an attempt in Sudan. We saw a number of African countries now which have been, a military coup has displaced the existing elected governments. So even in Kenya, we may not be far-fetched from that as well if we mismanage our system and we mismanage our political transition process. Okay. So I think we need to be careful as people, and the government should be very much, and I agree with Professor, be very diligent in terms of how they manage this. If the objective of introducing the BBI was to make sure that we don't get violence during elections and that we can have a cohesive society, then working to the contrary is not in our advantage, I think.
That's well noted. Professor, as you add your voice and as we put a rest to this particular matter, yes, we're expecting voter registration come October 4th, and we're targeting those 6 to 7 million voters. But in terms of managing elections, has IEBC been adequately supported, whether financially, in terms of the legislation passed in Parliament, in order to give us this free, fair and credible election?
Let me just quickly say something about the deep state before answering that question. I think this country has no deep state. I think we need to stop using very nice names like that one to describe just bad Kenyans. Or evil Kenyans, who can say that people die when the election is managed. So these people are not nice people. They are not people that we need to respect. Now, deep state as used in the Western countries is the career civil servants who love their country so much, they are willing to suffer personal loss to safeguard their motherland. That's not what we have here. We have people who manipulate the system, use the money that they have, we can call them criminal entrepreneurs, and then they use that money, use the government apparatus like provincial administration to put a friendly regime, which now can continue protecting their next part of looting. So they loot in the friendly regime, then they put another friendly regime. These are the one we are calling deep state. We shouldn't call them deep state. We should find another name. Just like we baptize the corruption so that it looks better. Okay. Now, your question. What was your question again?
Well, in terms of enabling IEBC to take care of its own mandate, have we done enough?
When you look in the papers, we have not. It's like we are doing it and not doing it. And you are scared that is confusion being done deliberately, because voter registration is crucial. You have to have a clean voter register in order to know who is voting where. And so without that, we have 4 pieces of register in this country. You have ward register, you have constituency register, you have county register, and then, of course, you have the Kenyans abroad. So that's what constitutes the national register. So if voter registration is not moving in tandem with those ID card for this new generation, remember, we had 1 million people 1 million Kenyans turn 18 every year, actually. Okay. Every year, 1 million. So this thing, the IEBC has not, in my opinion, being facilitated properly. And this is what you do when you want to cause confusion. You go slow on a lot of things.
Okay, interesting. Let's shift focus, Gule, and I'm looking at that particular story that we ran just earlier in terms of what Professor has mentioned, criminal entrepreneurs. And this perhaps is a gentleman leaving. In terms of this criminal entrepreneur, the businessman is set to serve a mandatory sentence for receiving 180 million falsified payments from the Youth Fund. This particular case has been a long time coming, so we've finally seen prosecution. And what's your reaction to this?
I think it's a positive thing. At least the courts now have started acting. This has been missing all this time. We have just been hearing talks and no action. So I really want to commend both the DPP and the courts for making sure this has reached this level. I just hope that there will be no appeal, and then it just becomes merely a publicity issue. And but in this case, I understand there's even no appeal. I understand. So this is a positive thing. But one thing I need to say about this is that as a country, we are really facing a challenge because the ethics, in philosophy, we normally have what we refer to as legal and ethics. In Kenya, the gray areas around there is very complicated. A lot of Kenyans, particularly young people today, don't see anything wrong with stealing. In fact, they think it is something good. They have only seen people have gotten richer through stealing. So the fight against corruption needs to be taken down even to the schools, where we start educating people at a very young age about the virtues and the misvirtues of corruption, and on what Professor called as glorification of theft. Yeah. It is theft. We call it by that name. Unfortunately, Jesse, again, is that the gentleman now, Mr. Ngao, I think, who is being now sentenced to 27 years. Yeah. I don't think he can raise the 700 million. So I just see him rotting for 27 years in jail. Is just one individual. We have thousands and thousands of others. What do we do about them? People who became rich through the KEMSA heist. You have seen what's going on with the Kenya Power and Lighting. Blatant theft. And this has been going on, I understand, from the year 2002. People who have stolen billions and billions by overcharging you and I through electricity bills that we should not have been paying. People who have stolen money at the Kenya pipelines. People who have stolen money through other state corporations, the NHIF, the NSSF. So many people have gotten rich through theft. In fact, anybody who is rich in Kenya today is just a thief, most likely, 90%.
Okay.
I want to just add what my friend here just said.
Yeah.
You are rich in Kenya, either you worked with the government or you trended with the government. That's why the country is not moving.
Interesting. I'm falling short of asking you gentlemen if you're rich. But anyway, in terms of the energy wars in the country, Professor, as you add your voice to this, just yesterday the Treasury PS mentioned that the National Treasury drew 18.1 billion from the Petroleum Development Levy Fund and gave it to the State Department of Infrastructure to pay for the upgrade of petroleum infrastructure in the country. And we well know the money from this fund is meant to stabilize the fuel prices, and perhaps we are reeling from the after effects of such money being diverted. Well, what's your reaction to this, Prof?
Oh, that's another diversion, because what is upgrade of petroleum infrastructure, what does that supposed to mean? I understand we found it somewhere in Trogana. We don't know what happened to it. But you need to understand this. The Kenyans are financing corruption in their suffering. The energy problem here, the companies have run away to Ethiopia. They have run away to Tanzania because the energy is artificially too high. If you remember this called IPP, these independent power producers, which are the same people in the government, these fellows, they buy power, purchase it from Kenyan for 50 cents. And they sell it to us for 23 shillings. Now, if you follow through, it had reached 157 when the state somehow decided to act in order, in my opinion, I believe, to simply kill the desire to correct it. because the desire to correct, this thing has to be corrected, because if it's not corrected, the country economically will go nowhere. Power, energy is so important.
Okay.
So anything that we do here, it seems we simply do to protect these entrepreneurs.
All right. Interesting. We'll definitely delve deeper into this other developments, but a lot more details in today's Daily is the back page of the Daily Nation, informing you about what the PS of Treasury said in terms of how money was actually diverted in one way or the other.